now continue with episode 3 of the Gulf Crisis, The Road to War.
I'm now going to show you a picture of the luckiest man in Iraq.
The vehicle can be seen driving across this bridge moments before it's destroyed.
And now in his rearview mirror,
what we getting, we outsiders? A complete picture of the war from the briefings? It did occur to me that possibly more emphasis would be put on the hits than on the misses.
We, at one point late in the war, put together a large map of Baghdad out of aerial photographs, big, huge one, and indicated on it every single hit and miss that had landed in the city. And what just leaps out at you is most of that city is just untouched by American bombs. It's extraordinary how selective and precise it was.
On February 13th, night bombing was among the heaviest of the war. Targets in and around Baghdad were systematically attacked. This public shelter in Al Amaria took a direct hit. It was part of a complex constructed during the Iran-Iraq War.
And what was your response to that?
We, among other things, spent a lot of time looking again at what the target was and kind of doing the second guessing of whether it was properly on the list.
It was a key part of the command system inside Baghdad, and evidence that we have been able to collect since the war reconfirms, in my view, the wisdom of hitting that particular target.
This is not a general air raid shelter for the population of Baghdad. It's still a matter of debate why the civilians were there, whether they were families of the military in the bunker or whether they were put there deliberately.
If we had known there were civilians in there, obviously we wouldn't have hit the target, but we had no reason to believe there would be civilians there. We were being very careful.
I think for the people who had been involved specifically in selecting that target, I know there was a lot of personal anguish afterwards. You could see it on their faces.
This man said that 11 of his family members were in the shelter.
Oh, Daddy, why I lose my wife and my children, and that's there.
I got a different perspective on it. I was sent by the president to Morocco to talk to the king at that point, and he said, you need to think about it for a moment in the perspective of how Iraqis will look at this. And he said, in that sense, what's happened is not going to be viewed in Iraq in the way you in the West view it as the terrible, awful thing it is, but rather it is a demonstration in Iraq to an awful lot of Iraqis as to how vulnerable they really are.
Dr. Haas, I suppose the bottom line on this Amaria thing is, did that incident have any effect on the conduct of the war? At the risk of sounding heartless, no.
The Revolutionary Council Command has decided the following. Readiness of Iraq to deal with Resolution 660 with the aim of reaching a political resolution including withdrawal.
That Iraqi statement at first gave rise to hope, in fact, turned out to be a cruel hoax.
On the surface, it sounded like a significant step. In fact, he would have preserved much of what he had gotten.
And there's another way for the bloodshed to stop, and that is for the Iraqi military and the Iraqi people to take matters into their own hands and force Saddam Hussein, the dictator, to step aside.
The president was responding explicitly that day to President Saddam Hussein's phony peace offer, which you'll recall implied a willingness to withdraw from Kuwait, but only if all the coalition forces went home, and only if Israel withdrew from the occupied territories, and only if the Syrians did X, Y, and Z.
We immediately called our allies to make sure that nobody was taking this as anything but a ploy, and it turned out that we had great success with Everybody but the Soviet Union.
After the talks in Moscow, the Soviet plan hinted that withdrawal could at last be considered. The proposals were secret and unconfirmed.
Like at other points during the crisis, you have now had a new diplomatic intervention, which, if it were allowed to gain a life of its own and gain momentum, could begin to chip away at the unconditionality of the basic objectives and the basic UN resolutions.
I think this was a genuine effort on the part of the Soviets to try and solve the problem short of a ground war. But it was not a solution that met 660, Resolution 660, because it had some conditions, and it had, for instance, the abolition of the remaining resolutions that had been passed by the Security Council, so it was therefore unacceptable.
We were really at the sort of point of maximum readiness, and that was a consideration also, that you, a few hours delay more or less, or a few days more or less, would not be significant, but you had momentum, you had morale, you had readiness, you had precise factors of time and weather and darkness that had been calculated, and you couldn't play around with those too much.
We assembled in the president's private residence after I think he went to the theater, and other principals had evening obligations. Some of them were still in black tie, as I recall. And the reason we met was that the Soviets had come in with an idea that would have granted more time to resolve the matter. And frankly, the prevailing view was that the Iraqis were just trying to stiff us and stiff the whole world once again.
How, in the end, did you bring this to a conclusion?
And the outcome in the end was that we gave them the 24 hours to get out or not.
And the president settled on an option that said, okay, fine, if you can have them out of Dodge by noon on Saturday, then we'll be interested. But that's it. Set a deadline.
24-hour ultimatum.
As in so many other cases, Saddam was his own worst enemy. I recall we were in a deputies meeting in the Situation Room, and word came that President Mitterrand was phoning the president to talk about giving him a 72-hour delay, and suddenly the intelligence came in that he had started blowing up the oil fields in Kuwait, and Bob Gates went up to the president put the paper in front of him saying, this is what's happening.
I had left the Situation Room on the ground floor of the White House and went upstairs to the Oval Office and through the Oval Office to the study where the president was speaking to President Mitterrand, and gave General Scowcroft the word of what was going on.
And the president said to Mitterrand, look what's happening, we can't wait, we can't give him 72 hours.
Kuwait was in the process of being destroyed.